Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
All right, I'm Tom Urim from Argonne. I'm going to talk about the Access Grid project. We have a history with Conference XP. We've worked with Todd for a while. How many people are familiar with the Access Grid? Let me see a show of hands. How many people have used version 3 of the Access Grid? How about version 2? Okay.
Go on all the way back.
Version 1 only? Very good. All right. So we started the Access Grid back in 98, 99, prototyping. What could we do if we assumed that we didn't have any constraints in terms of bandwidth and we could scale using multiple machines? What kind of interesting things could we enable for collaboration? The insistence was always on collaboration, not just video conferencing. Even though we were scaling up video conferencing, we want to think about more than that. So if you look at video conferencing, what we were after was making people feel like they were in the room with people in the remote locations. Science is, one of my colleagues said science is increasingly a team sport. But the teams are distributed, unfortunately. People work most effectively together when they're in the same place. In the spirit of collaboration, I have too many slides. I'm going to try to run through quickly, but if you have questions, please feel free to stop me. So what we did back years ago was to use multiple machines to bring in a lot of cameras and a lot of displays. At the time, the standards were P3 550s. We needed multiple machines. And it made a lot of sense to separate video from audio because bad audio is very bad. So we didn't want that to suffer because we had too much video. So we started building these rooms and they spread around. We had integrated support for text messaging through MUDs. There wasn't data sharing at the time, but it's something we integrated. And there was eventually application sharing in terms of shared presentation. Since that initial prototyping of AG1, we've gone through a phase with AG2, experimenting with a richer client and integrating a bunch more functionality. We learned a lot of lessons, and now we're at AG3, which is a complete interoperability break with AG2. We've been focusing on simplifying installation and use. So you see here a couple snapshots of the click-through installers that we have for OS X and for Windows. It's pretty trivial to set up. We try to focus on performance. We've made good strides there since AG2. Better reliability. You know, there's one way to succeed, but there are a lot of ways to fail, right? You look at error codes in the Unix world. 0 means you succeeded. All the other values are preserved for failures, right? Because there's a lot of ways to fail. We need to fail better. That means informing the user and doing things systematically when we can to avoid having to inform the user. We're focusing on interoperability. That means standards compliance all over the place. I'll talk about that more. We've always insisted on open source and open licensing, as open as possible in terms of licensing, BSD style. People can do anything they want with our code. And we need to be secure. You know, we're enabling government administrators and scientists. They care sometimes, at least, about their content. So this is a screenshot of the venue client. I'll go through this software briefly. The venue client takes you into a venue. You see on the left a list of the other venues that you can enter from this venue. When you enter a venue, you see the audio and video for the other people in the room. It's a model that you're familiar with, clearly, if you're here. On the right-hand side, you see who else is in the venue with you. You see the data that's in the venue, so you can transfer data and leave it in the venue. You can have services in a venue. This is basically identifies something on the internet that you can get to if you have a suitable client. And there are application sessions. So I'll talk about the shared applications more. In this version of the Access Grid, we have added also, there's in our media tools, there's support for WDM devices. Finally, we move forward to supporting WDM devices while Conference XP says, hey, there's still a lot of VFW devices that we need to support. So, and in fact, in the most recent version, you can use multi-headed WDM devices, and it works. We do have, as there's been a fair amount of discussion, on the venue client, on the toolbar at the top, you see there's a multicast indicator. From where you are, it looks like a small red splotch. It's basically like a network icon with a red surrounded X on it.
Meaning it's not working.
It was not working when I was sitting here when I took the screenshot. So if you have multicast, it's green. If you click that button, then you see a beacon matrix view. It's why? So they can see just me? You see a beacon matrix view. Now there's been a lot of talk about beacon integration. So this shows you your multicast connectivity with other people. It's not complete because it's a subjective view. It only shows you your data. There is no central collector. But hey, we have a venue server, so we could build a central collector per venue, and it'd be pretty easy to do to give you complete statistics. We previously didn't have any solution for scheduling. I never wanted to touch it. Ivan led this project previously before me. He wanted to integrate some kind of scheduling. The community wanted it. I didn't really. So the solution that I came up with was, well, I don't want to bind to any particular scheduling system. So what I'll do is allow people to publish meeting schedules, and we can subscribe to them from within the venue client. So for the community you care about, they can publish a schedule and you can subscribe to it, and directly from within the venue client, you can bring up that schedule and see those meetings and go directly to the venue that they're scheduled in. There was talk in this session immediately preceding this one about being able to have multiple machines that you bring in. As I mentioned before, this is something we've done for a long time. So there's a lot of use of single machine AG nodes, but in a room setting, it's typically multiple machines. Moving forward from where we were previously with P3 550s to today, we see people putting in single machine nodes to support a whole room because it works. But as you move to higher quality video, you're going to need the multiple machines again. So that support remains there, and it's interesting for a lot of other purposes too. The shared application, the application sessions section in the venue client is a place where shared applications sessions live, and you can join them. We do have an integrated shared presentation tool with our insistence on cross-platform support. This works on both Windows and Linux. So on Linux, it works with OpenOffice. We have a shared browser application also. This came up yesterday in the Conference XP talk. Here also, you can browse the web together. You also see at the bottom of the venue client the area that's reserved for chat. Integrated with the venue. In AG3, you actually get scroll back. So You get some state of what was happening in the room before you came. Multicast is a problem. It's always been a problem for us. When I try to view things, I came from the commercial software world. So I look at this and I say, what do the users care about, right? Should the users ever say the word multicast? Probably not, right? Should probably just work for them. So AG3 introduces this network of bridges, in which case there's a single bridge registry. People in different locations run bridges. They register with this registry. When a venue client starts up, it retrieves a list of bridges from this registry, and it does some measurement against all of them to prioritize them. And you'll see this is in this preferences dialog, which is in the venue client. You see a list of bridges that were available with the host that they're running on and this port range, and they're sorted by the distance, right? So if you just say use unicast, it'll go down the list and try and use them in that order, the ones that are closest to you. It's not perfect yet. I'll admit that. It does still need some work. But the idea is with multicast detection and multicast monitoring with the built-in beacon beacon client and this support, we have a path toward automatically switching to unicast without having to inform or involve the user. We have a single installer. You install it, you get the whole toolkit, you get the venue client, you get the bridge support, you get the venue server, so you can run your own server, and you get a venue management client with it for configuring venues on your server and doing everything you need to do. The venue server itself has a SOAP server. I'll talk more about technologies in a minute. An integrated FTP server that's built in for doing data transfer. It refers to an external Jabber server that may be integrated in a future release. And an event distribution service for maintaining state. So you enter a venue and you see who's there and which application sessions there are, and seconds later that changes, right? So you get updates to that state over this event distribution service so that everybody sees the same venue contents at all times. And with the venue management client, there's some points addressed there in terms of the functionality. You can create venues. You can manage which addresses are used by the venues. They can be either statically or dynamically addressed so that a venue always has the same address, or addresses are allocated on an as-needed basis. You can configure encryption and the keys used. You can do authorization. I'll talk more about that stuff in this slide. So one of the big lessons that we learned with AG2 was the space that we were filling really wanted to be more standards-based. We were focusing on or targeted toward grid computing, and so we integrated with Globus, for example. Well, it turns out that strategically we want to be able to enable grid computing for collaborations. But that doesn't mean that the access grid has to be a grid application itself. So we look at how can we enable everything we need with standard internet technologies. We get better interoperability. We get adherence to standards that are well established. So in this case, it's a rundown of the technologies we use. The code is written in Python. The components are now all network addressable. So the venue server, individual venues have a SOAP interface. You make SOAP calls against them, you get data back. The venue client itself has a SOAP interface. So you can make calls against it, tell it to go to a certain venue, retrieve the contents of the venue from it, do whatever you want there. The support for having multiple machines is all done with SOAP components. So you can make calls against any one of them. We've switched our SOAP implementation for AG3 to ZSI, which is targeted at interoperability according to established standards as much as that's possible these days. It's a work in progress. But we have had done some interoperability testing with a variety of implementations, made SOAP calls against this from .NET, from Java, from PHP, and from GSOAP. And in fact, while a couple of these .NET and PHP in particular really were just tests, I have had reports of people writing real applications that they actually use with Java and GSOAP. So the interoperability is paying off to some extent. The WSDL aspect of this, if you're familiar with it, means that you can retrieve the API on a SOAP component and build a stub client. So you can fill it in with implementation that you care about. So we get, in the first bullet, you get a broader base of developers, and then you enable them by the WSDL support. Now they can more easily build clients. Integrated FTPS data storage. We get the stability of a well-established data transfer standard. We're doing it securely. There's integrated Jabber text chat, which I mentioned before. Another established standard, and it brings us interop. That actually refers to the image that you see there. So you see the venue, you see me in the venue, and I'm interacting with iChat, because iChat speaks Jabber. So if for some reason you can't get into the venue because you don't have the software installed, or you're sitting on your mobile phone, or who knows what, you can actually interact with people by chatting. That enables some other interesting things too that I'll get to. XML event distribution, so imagine I want to write some interoperable software in another language, and I need to interact with the data serialization. XML, obviously everybody's heard of it, so you can access that from any other language or platform. Zero-conf networking, so I mentioned that we do this multiple machine support. We've integrated Apple's Bonjour so that you can locate those independent machines on your network to build this multi-machine node. If you've used iTunes, you may have seen that, you see other people's iTunes libraries listed in your client, and you can connect to them and listen to their music. It's the same sort of thing here. You say, show me the clients that are, the other machines that are on my network, and then you can just transparently connect to them. And in terms of audio tools, we rely on RAT and VIC. Maybe a lot of you are familiar with those. In RAT, there's a broad selection of codecs, but we've pretty much concentrated on this one for a while. There's some push to have more flexibility there. And in terms of VIC, well, we're still using H.261, although I'll talk more about that too. Security's been an issue. How many people really care about security for their meetings? Okay. So another one of the lessons we learned was in AG2 we gave every single user a certificate. A lot of them don't care about certificates. They're collaboration people, right? You give everybody a certificate. Maybe you enable some interesting grid type things, but if 99% of them don't care about that, you're just giving them a higher entry cost. So in AG3, you can't use a certificate for the client side. You can't use it. You don't care. Everybody can enter any venue. The servers use them to bootstrap the SSL connections. There is still this certificate management software, so that's what the screenshot is here. Basically, you can manage a pool of certificates locally and decide which one to use. Right now, you don't care about that so much, but you could imagine from a user perspective, if you entered secure venues, today I want to enter this DOE one that I have to use my DOE certificate for. Tomorrow I want to enter an NSF venue I have to use my NSF certificate for. This might be useful. Now, why do you care? Well, because by integrating this we're enabling SSL. So in AG2, there are some of the connections were not secured. They were authenticated but not encrypted. Now we're favoring encrypted and not authenticated, right? Or maybe authenticated on one side. Everything is over SSL. Everything's encrypted. The SOAP calls, the data transfers, the XML events that go all around to the different clients, and the jabber. It's not noticeable. In fact, we get a big, significant performance gain moving from AG2 to AG3. Haven't measured it.
You haven't measured the latency?
Right.
Which latency? In the media?
Basically end-to-end. So what am I getting in latency in audio and video due to encryption? Overhead of encryption. Go ahead.
There's potentially some weakness there in terms of the media. The statement is that the encryption doesn't introduce any noticeable latency. The statement's also been made that the security that's integrated with the media tools is a first implementation or an early implementation, and it hasn't been rigorously proven. But I invite you to try and break it. So looking at installations of the access grid, we have hundreds of conference rooms installed around the world. We don't count single machine installations, and it's probably too dynamic for us to try to count. Looking at software downloads is maybe one interesting metric. So for version 2, we had over 27,000 downloads over its lifetime, which is now just over 3 years. Version 3, which has been around for about 6 months, has had over 6,000, probably. Well, since with version 3 we really only ship the Windows and OS X clients, there aren't Linux numbers counted in there. I expect it to number in the several hundred. It's probably under 1,000 for Linux. Another metric from the AG2 world primarily is user certificates. So while we were busily issuing certificates to everybody in the AG2 world, we fielded over 26,000 requests for certificates. Now with AG3 coming up, I don't see user certificates from AG2 barely at all. I still actively sign certificates, and the great bulk of them are for venue servers. There's a surprising number of venue server certificate requests. Number of meetings, well, there is one scheduling system, AG Schedule, run by NCSA. It's not used by everybody, but it gives us one idea of the number of meetings scheduled in the research community in the US that uses AG Schedule, so you see numbers there. We have about 2 months left. I hope to see an upward trend there. But again, as I said, there's a number of meetings that aren't scheduled on AG Schedule, so the numbers are only an approximation. I was curious about how many people were running venue servers, so you do a quick look around and you can find, I easily found over 20 venue servers. You know, they really range in size. So there's the Asia Pacific community that runs a venue server for people in that whole region. There's also people in Louisiana who run a venue server for the group of hospitals in Louisiana, right? There's maybe 6 hospitals. There's a big difference in terms of the size. This is a map of, well, when people enter our servers, we get some indication of where they're coming from. So this is a map of IP addresses that have hit our servers. This is about 4,000 data points. Thanks to Ivan and MapPoint, I was able to plot them all because until this morning, this was a Google map that would only let me plot 1,500 of the data points before it stopped responding to me. Another interesting thing here is that on the Google map that dropped off some points. we didn't have Israel. So now I see that in the whole data set, we actually do have Israel. Notably missing is, say, Moscow and St. Petersburg. I don't know what's going on there.
And all the State Department listed countries that we're not allowed to talk to.
Yeah.
Kazakhstan, there's nobody from Kazakhstan.
They've been removed. You look briefly at places where the access grid is being used. There are different communities that have formed regionally for the access grid. Different deployments, people looking at using the access grid on a more official basis. Looking just briefly at this, the people at the Advanced Photon Source at Argonne are using it because they have a big facility with a bunch of remote researchers, and they want to enable people to have access to the experimental facility from their home institutions without having to travel. There was one of the groups that's doing this at the APS is actually reconfiguring their schedule because of the way that they did it, where they had people fly in and have access to the machine for 2 full days while they're there, sole access to the machine. The model's changing, so now they have people coming in remotely, and they're actually scheduling like 4-hour slots for these remote people. So, and they can run them 24 hours. They can. They don't always, but it gives them better utilization of the machine, as you can imagine. HPC Europa is a project across multiple European nations on the continent, looking to bootstrap this as a collaboration service for their science community. So here's some images from different uses that I found interesting. If you balk at this kind of thing, don't look at it. Well, how do you know if you're going to balk at it? So starting from that one, it was an example of people in Korea using HD to enable medical instruction. So they have surgery at one location, they have doctors and students at other locations watching the surgery and learning. I'm not always sure whether they're more interested in the HD or in the medicine, but I mean, obviously the two feed off of each other. So, proceeding clockwise from there, here's an image of a TerraGrid conference. The TerraGrid involves like 9 institutions around the country. They have meetings more than once weekly. You can see the scale of some of the meetings. You can imagine 30 to 40 people in one of these meetings. Imagine telling them that they all had to travel to one location every week, right? Maybe 3 times a week. They wouldn't go for it. They would be unhappy, and not to mention it would be prohibitively expensive. This is an example of a fusion experiment whereby this guy in California took part in a fusion experiment at a facility in the UK. He actually had gone there to do the experiment. He got there and they said, we're having problems with the facility, it's not going to work. So he went back home not having done his experiment. And then they said, okay, we're ready for you. And he said, well, I'm not flying back. So they did it this way instead. And he was able to, I'll be honest with you, this is not an AG-enabled tool. This is a web-enabled tool that they built that gives data off of the detectors during the experiment. But having integrated that in to this environment where they could talk to each other enables the experiment. And the way this works is that they have an experiment every 20 minutes. They run one, they get data off of the detectors as you see there, they discuss it, they make some changes to the experimental parameters and apply them in time for that next experimental run. So having this communication is really important for them. And they're not doing this on a regular basis. This was, something that they did. I don't know if they're continuing it, but it's a good example of equipping or connecting people with devices. The next image is integration of a visualization, collaborative visualization. In this case, it's actually back-ended by a cluster of machines that are doing the rendering. You see the probe going into that area. This is prototype stuff that the other half of people in my group are doing. So the user interacts with this visualization, and the interaction is fed back to this cluster to do the rendering, and it comes back to him and to the other participants. So they see the same thing. So integrated access to the cluster. The other application is something called shared graphs. If you're familiar with GIS, this is a GIS application. Some people in Australia took it and integrated it as a shared application so that people can interact with this and people at remote institutions see the same thing. So this slide really embodies the comment that I made on the first slide, which was we're interested in more than just audio and video. When you get people together and they can work together, the next thing that they want to do is model that scenario where one guy's sitting at the computer and the other guys are gathered around behind him watching what he's doing. That's what this is after. Beyond use, we also include a development toolkit. So when you get the software and install it, you already have that, and you can just begin using it. The support that you get from that, we have some areas that we've intended for extension. So shared application support, some of the stuff you saw on the last slide, there are components included that enable building shared applications. So what does that give you? You get basically an application in the venue has a SOAP interface. And so this encapsulates that SOAP interface so that you can easily make calls against it. To do things like storing data in the venue, there's actually in-memory storage in a venue that distributed clients can access and modify. It's an interesting concept to have shared state in the application that way that you can just access. You get connected to an event distribution service for that application. So for example, in the shared presentation, one person changes a slide and the event goes out to everybody else. I think it's worth noting that that is as much of this infrastructure that supports the venue client, it's direct SSL connections outbound. So we don't have any firewall issues here. These applications and the venue client make outbound connections to the venue server, and then they're fed back events to maintain state. There's also support for building node services. These are the things that typically handle sending and receiving audio and video, although it's the general framework for running stuff on one of the machines in your local client cluster. So there's interesting things that could be done there. I really wish we had some devices laying around at the lab that I could try to integrate this way, like, for example, a microscope, right? Well, it'd be great if it had an interface for controlling it remotely, because then I could just toy with integrating this and letting people try it. Yes?
So if you use your SDK to develop shared applications, do the Access Grid archive solutions archive all of that? So if you've got the shared GIS application or this shared electron microscopy, if someone goes to play back that later, are they going to get all that stuff as well? Or is that extra work that the developers have to do to actually enable that?
It's extra. They would have to subscribe to that event channel and store those events separately.
And to play it back, someone would have to have their applet as well installed. So it's stored in whatever random format that they're doing. So
right,
they
and
would also need to have
the recorder should be able to look at it opaquely and play it back opaquely, right?
Right, but they still have to
But they would have to be subscribed to the event channel. Now, I was interested when I saw your model of, okay, we're going to do everything on multicast so that we can record everything the same way and play it back the same way. That's interesting, but it's
well, it means everything can be recorded, but I see certain advantages to the model that you've got as well. So.
No multicast. Right? I mean, shared applications work without multicast.
Right. There are other advantages, too, that are awkward, right? You don't have to RTP encapsulate the data streams at all. They can be in whatever block extensible, transport model that they use. But it does require that sort of either the centralized archiver has an extensibility model and they have advanced clients or some other form.
Right.
A trade-off there.
We could possibly facilitate that, with an additional module.
Yeah, an opaque recording tool or something.
Yes.
You maintain transactions against that data for the shared application? Because, in other words, can you roll back the actual content of the shared application?
No.
No.
No, there isn't support for that now.
It depends on which application. So in the shared presentation, it's conceivable that could be implemented with the data archive today, because the event slide transitions are events, and those are archived. And
That's
the
true.
slides are archived.
In
And there's timing information.
But
that's
as you
included.
make changes, I mean, you're not keeping any type of history of those changes, and so therefore you can't unchange.
Well, actually, so Ivan makes a good point, because the in-memory data storage for applications that I mentioned, it lives on the server, right? And it's just keyword value. And so it's up to the application how it uses that. It could store anything. It could store 5 versions of the data or some history of transactions and then rely on it. So it's an interestingly different model where all the power lives in the distributed clients to do whatever they want.
And it was intentionally because we saw things like rollback as a hard problem, but also layering for ink and annotation type models are really hard to support generically. So we wanted to build an extensibility model that facilitated that for the people who needed it.
Okay, so back on the node services front, you can plug in additional services for handling different audio-video types or other things that you want to run on different machines. We've also seen people try to combine these two things. So now I have an application I'm using with other people, and I want it to be integrated with stuff running on other machines. You could imagine maybe a shared tiled display. Right? A tiled display brings in 10 other machines, and I share state with other people in the venue. That's possible. Really, there's no limit to the number of machines you can back end on this. And a point I make there is that with this node service support that's there, it's reasonably trivial to add a new video tool, for example. So if I wanted to add support for an additional codec by bringing in some tool other than VIC, I could very easily do that. I said it requires tens of lines of code. I could do it easily in an afternoon. It'd probably take me less than an hour. And then in the core, you get all the code, right? And everything is network addressable. So you can make calls against anything you want. There's certificate management infrastructure that you use it for something entirely different. We don't care. We're just looking at what we can enable. How many people know how to program in Python? Okay, it doesn't matter, right? So here's an example of a chunk of code that you can use to get a list of the people in a venue, given the venue address. Do you need to know Python to understand that? I don't think so, right? I mean,
Stop that.
Go ahead.
huh. You create a client for the venue, you retrieve the list of clients, and you print them. Big deal. When I get the list of multicast addresses from a venue, it's obviously very similar. I put the venue client here so that you get the idea that while there are other venue contents too, and you want to retrieve those, go retrieve them, print them. Do whatever you want with them. A number of people have picked up the development toolkit and built other applications. There's a long list of things here. Many of them were built related to the AG2 world. We're in transition, so some of them have been migrated to AG3. They've gone through the trouble of making those 2 lines of code change to make it work with the new version of AG. A couple of examples. So somebody in WestGrid, Todd Zimmerman, put together a wrapping of VNC. So it's a shared application. It lives in the venue. You can actually see it in the venue there. You open that session. You get this minimal client, right? That gives you the option to share your desktop, and it shows you other people who are sharing their desktops. You want to see their desktop? Just check it. And it connects your VNC client to their VNC server. We obviously have firewall problems here, but surprisingly, there are a number of people in the AG community who just have their networks wide open. And it's not us. If I want to run a VNC server, I have to fight with the systems guys for more than a day. So it doesn't work. But for them, yeah, sure, it works. And it's a really usable way of looking at it. Well, we needed a recording solution, and we didn't build it ourselves for the newer versions of the Access Grid toolkit. So Derek Piper at Indiana University went off and did it himself. So pretty generic. You can point this at an Access Grid venue, either AG2 or AG3, and it will go there, retrieve the multicast addresses, present them here, show you the list of participants, let you select which streams you want to record, and let you record them. It maintains an archive locally. You can select from among them and play them back. So in this case, it's the opposite model of the CXP archiver, right? I mean, archiver is a service that lives somewhere. This is only a user tool. But it's built in such a way that it could be deployed as a service, and it's something I've talked to Derek about, so it may happen. I don't have an image here, unfortunately. These guys at Australian National University have been working on a series of tools that all start with V. So originally there was VP for video presence. It was a video display tool. They created VX, which does everything because well, X is a variable, and they have VB, which is a bridging tool. Pretty impressive list of features. It's in beta. You should see a final release soon, unless it happened last week. But it enables some really interesting things, right? Basically, they took a transcoding engine and they stuck it behind SOAP. And so you can tell the thing, I need this multicast address bridged, and it gives you back an address. And you can also say, give me 2 frames a second on the video because that's all I can handle. Or you can say, use this other codec. Or you can say, I don't have so much bandwidth, mix all the video into one stream and make them all postage stamps. Or mix all the audio before you send it to me because I can't handle 256K from everybody. Mix it all down, give me one single 256K stream. Or make it GSM so it's only 30K. It also has support built in for NAT traversal, and it's built as a shared application for the AG, specifically for AG3. There's, as you could see from the map, there's a pretty significant user community in the Access Grid. So about 6 months ago, we migrated the website to a content management system. So it's more of a community-driven site. People can come here, they log in, they can contribute to content. There are a number of people helping to write documentation. There are links to software. We put up a hardware reference. So one of the most common questions is, does this camera work? Which capture card are people using? So that stuff can be posted here so people have a reference. And they can leave comments with respect to individual hardware pieces.
How's that working for you? Have you had any, spam or malicious people problems or anything like that?
Only this random thing.
Have you been looking over my shoulder?
No, I haven't. I'm actually asking because this is something that some folks have requested. They wanted us to set up basically a public SharePoint site for that, and of course, I get nervous because anything attached to Microsoft at least tends to attract all of that. I'm wondering if you have the same sort of problems with this.
We have had issues with it. At this point, it's only occasional. I'm considering strategies for combating it.
So I've done this for a couple of projects in the past year.
Speak loudly.
I've done this, building this sort of web presence for a couple of projects in the past year, and the two things that seem to make a significant difference is not allowing any anonymous contributions and adding things like captchas for forcing human interaction in the loop.
Right.
And
So we don't allow anonymous comments, but we still get,
Well-
get people signing up, and they have to give a legitimate email address to get back.
But if you
the
use
password,
captchas,
all
then
that's
you can eliminate
trivial.
those. And what we've found is that could reduce, in particular on one community that we built, it reduces spam from in the hundreds to thousands per day to less than 10. That robots just aren't quite there yet.
Right. Yeah, I like I said, I'm considering strategies. I'm sure I'll still get, the person who's actually sitting down and typing stuff in. Right. It won't be just bot driven. But yeah. Other than that, it's working out all right. I mean, people contribute reasonable content. Todd mentioned the AG Central site yesterday that has the node listings. I'm actually working with them to migrate the content from AG Central into the accessgrid.org site so that there's a single site. So that'll include the documentation, which is actively being migrated over, and the node listings will be migrated over too.
Is your plan to migrate to move off of the AG Central site, or simply are you just looking to duplicate content?
AG Central will go away so that there's a single source of the information.
Okay.
And then I want to do some interesting things like web service enabling the node listing, so people have access to that data, and you can build a Google map of it very easily. I mean, a map point map. Well, Google Maps won't let me plot more than 1,500 of them, so. There will be a release soon. I was really hoping it would be out before November this year, but it hasn't happened. Focusing on, in the open source world, the dependencies that we rely on don't always include everything that we need, and so we have to push back and contribute to them occasionally too. Integrating support for client-side certificates has been one of these things where we're pushing code back to another project to support it. So why did I start off by saying, people don't care about certificates, and now I'm saying, well, we're adding in client-side certificate support? The reason is, pretty simple. I have firsthand supported big DOE meetings between administrators across multiple labs who didn't want other people coming into the meeting, and they insisted that the data be encrypted. I have to be able to tell them yes. There are people at the Advanced Photon Source, for example, who are bringing their device into venues. Maybe you don't want a random guy coming in and fiddling with your accelerator. Where's Jonathan? Jonathan was saying he'd like to have access to, particle physics stuff from his desktop. Hierarchical data storage in venues. If you're aware of the AG community, you probably have heard this for a while, but it is actually in CVS now and will be included. Basically, that means that the data that's in venues won't just be flat anymore. You'll be able to have folders. That's a contribution from a guy in Germany, Michael Breitmeyer, who wants it because he's doing visualization work. So he's got significant data sets and doesn't want everything represented in a flat structure. It looks to me like it's useful for supporting grid computing. So I could have individual folders for jobs that were submitted, and in there I would have job submission data and the results and maybe links to post-processing. There's plug-in application support, so it's another extension that we'll be able to integrate. These are things that run on the client side. They're not shared applications. They're not a node service. The obvious application for that is AGVCR, where you just want to be able to make a selection from within the client and say, record this meeting. Now, it makes it transparent for us. I mean, it's a plug-in, right? People can have a pretty reasonable integration without us having to write custom code. And support for alternate bridge networks. So I mentioned that we have this universal bridge registry, and everybody goes to and retrieves a list of bridges. Now we have a group of people in Taiwan who say, well, I need to enable the 12 sites around the country, but I don't really want to provide bridging services to the world. So allowing them to have their own bridge network that everybody points at is something that we're going to support here. One point that I wanted to make in the certificate area, the point was made yesterday that shared keys for encryption works, and it's what people use. That in the AG2 world, that was a weakness for us, because we could control who could come into a venue, and we would hand out encryption keys to them so that they were the only ones who had access to the media. But when we handed them the encryption keys, that was over a clear link. So now with all of these connections being encrypted, it really is, we've solved this key distribution problem. So only if you're allowed in the venue can you get the encryption key and access to the media streams. So there are points here about what we're looking at for the future. Personally, I like to look at this project as a basis for people doing science. I want rich collaboration. I want people to come in and say, I need to be able to look at my chemistry models, and I use this software, and I can say, use this shim, and it'll be a shared application, and you'll be able to use to work with remote chemists to look at your data. And now maybe you're not a chemist, but you're a biologist, or you're, who knows, a psychologist, or I'd like to enable that sort of thing. However, not everybody's a scientist in this community. And actually, they seem to be in the minority in this community where I try to push. Collaboration is really a core thing. So just enriching the collaboration seems to be very important. So we're looking at ways of doing that in terms of the environment, in terms of applications, integrating with the user workspace. The adherence to standards really opens up a lot of possibilities here. So an example from science is that the fusion guys used some small piece of Jabber code so that they get data off of the detectors, and it messages that directly into the venue chat, right? So people sitting in the venue get text output from detectors. You could do the same thing with the data. I was sitting at my desk, I don't know, a month ago, and I have this terminal window where I have a list of files, and I have a venue client sitting in a venue. And I thought, I want that file there. But I'd have to bring up some file browser, and I thought, I'm not a GUI guy. I don't want to do that. I should just be able to copy it. So I spent 15 minutes, and I wrote a venue CP script, which would just copy that file to the venue I specify. It's an interesting integration that you could have. You could imagine having a dedicated venue for your work where you keep all of your data, and maybe on Windows you have something in the tray that indicates that data store, and you could just drag data to that all day, and it would just automatically be loaded into the venue. And maybe it'd have pop-ups when other people added data. So it's that kind of integration that we want to look at. I say investigate integration of other devices. We can do Jabber integration from PDAs and cell phones now. It'd be interesting to look at application of the media tools to those devices, especially in light of something like the VB bridge tool. Lower bandwidth media, we actually have people pushing on both spectrums. People in labs and universities who've got big networks and big displays, and they meet with two other people who also have big networks and big displays, right? I should be able to do whatever quality of video I want, being only limited by my network. On the other hand, we have people in remote locations, home users who really don't have much available to them, and so they want a lesser solution. Interoperability, so development language interoperability, I talked about that before with SOAP and the different standards. Audio-video interoperability is always an issue for us. We can't just move to some other standard that's only supported on one platform, unfortunately. There is a lot of activity there in terms of video, so you can actually get tools to do DV using DVTS, HD using VLC, uncompressed HD using UltraGrid. I'd be interested to see what other tools we could integrate the same way. It has to be cross-platform compatible, obviously. But it's an open source project, so I mean, anybody could take it and say, my community only operates on Windows, right? And so we're going to integrate the Windows media tools and use them. There are a group of people managing the media tools that we use at the University College London, and there's support going into their repository for H.263, H.264, MPEG-4, and there's an undergoing project for integrating the DV codec with VIC. So there's a lot of support going in there which will bring interesting things to us cross-platform. And integration with compute and data servers. This is my last slide just as a summary. Some high-level bullets. We're platform independent. We're extensible, so we're not only about video and audio, but you can build applications. Flexible with this clustering of machines on the client side. Software's free and open source. It's secure, both in terms of confidentiality, encrypted data, and in terms of using cryptography for authentication and authorization. And there's a development toolkit so you can build it to suit your purpose. And there's a significant community that you can turn to. There are active mailing lists for both users and developers. You can go there and ask a question and get started. That's it. Any questions?
Tom,
Yes.
you mentioned about that DV being able to incorporate that into the VIC. How soon do you think that that code would be coming in with the guys at London?
That code is actually being written at the University of Queensland.
Oh, okay.
And it's just starting, and it's their project, so I can't speak for them, but I can say that the
DV display, so if you want to just throw a DV strip and switch a display your video consumer to using VP, and it will handle it.
well, VP will display DV,
Yeah.
but they're looking at capturing DV in VIC for transmission. And that's just getting started. I can say that the developer moved very quickly with integrating some external codecs for H.263 and actually MPEG-2, which is interesting.
Our academic year finishes next week, so they'll probably have time to get it done over the next couple of weeks.
Very good.
So, thank you.